There's no way to understand it except that this is what we've caused. It's the only possible explanation.
Well, at more than 420 parts per million in May, scientists measure the highest levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere since they started taking direct measurements 63 years ago. And when that data is compared to changes from the last 800,000 years, scientists say the rate we're increasing at is higher than ever before. Tonight, we're breaking down what scientists call the carbon skyscraper in part 1 of our Climate Smart series.
Basically, the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, century to century, 1,000 years to the next, has been going up and down at the speed of a tortoise. And the change of the last 100 years, it's not even a hair, it's a bullet.
From direct measurements of carbon dioxide at Mauna Loa, Hawaii, to 800,000-year-old ice from Antarctica, scientists are able to piece together perhaps the most dramatic graph you'll ever see for the case of human-induced climate change. But reconstructing climate history isn't simple. Direct measurements of temperature only go back a couple of hundred years. One way to understand planetary warming is through ice from the coldest place on Earth. Dr. Matthew Lockneat is a paleoclimatologist. He studies ice that is nearly 1 million years old.
It puts down layers every year, and it starts off as snow. And within that snow, there's air. And as the snow starts to compact, those air pockets turn into air bubbles as the snow turns into ice.
Drilling through a mile of ice, scientists are able to slice out sheets for every time period, melt it, and analyze just how much carbon dioxide was trapped.
All of those measurements are giving you a real snapshot of what was in the atmosphere at the time that ice was deposited from thousands to hundreds of thousands of years ago.
And to Dr. Benjamin Strauss, who helped create the carbon skyscraper, that snapshot is devastatingly clear.
Really worked hard to find the way to make a picture to show just how drastically human activity has changed the situation on Earth.
Here's the idea. The skyscraper explains how much change there has been in carbon dioxide levels compared to the last 1,000-year average. The higher the number, the bigger the change. The natural variability in the climate is easy to see. It's warmed and cooled naturally over time. Imagine those little bumps and dips in the graph as toddlers.
Some toddlers are taller and some are shorter, and then you have Shaq. Like, the difference is obvious. That's us putting carbon in the atmosphere.
We've had high carbon levels before, but Dr. Strauss says it's not just about the amount of carbon, it's about time, too.
The key thing is how fast do you get there, right? And if we get there in a blink, nothing is going to have the time to adapt. It means kind of mass death of species and great strain for people and civilization in a way it never would if the change were gradual.
And even the gradual changes were enough to swing us into ice ages and warm periods.
When you see this spike at the end, it's kind of unthinkable. Like, where is that going to lead us?
The reason for the doubt and where that leads? Carbon sits in the atmosphere. Its effects take time to hit. Simply put,
the impacts we're seeing haven't yet caught up to how much carbon we've added to the atmosphere or how much we've warmed the planet.
Dr. Strauss says the bad news is that the situation with the atmosphere has happened very quickly. However,
the good news is we're also capable of cleaning up very quickly.
Well, what is quickly to you in your mind?
Fair enough. We were just talking about, hundreds of thousands of years.
800,000 years?
No, that's not quick. I think we can make huge change in a decade. I think we can be looking at a really different world and prospect within 10 years.
Now, even if we stopped putting out CO2 today, remember, we have yet to feel the effects of what we did 10 years ago. Change would just keep the warming from becoming even worse down the line. In part 2 of our climate series, meteorologist Greg Perez will explain how we got here and what lies ahead as he breaks down the carbon cycle. That's coming up tomorrow night on Fox 43 News at 10.
Once carbon dioxide goes in the atmosphere, there's no natural way to get rid of it quickly.
And this morning, scientists say that's the problem. What goes up doesn't come down when it comes to carbon emissions. We all know the saying, life is all about balance. Well, the Earth is no different.
So what happens when we as humans emit too much carbon into the atmosphere? Fox 43's Greg Perez continues our Climate Smart series with a look at the carbon cycle.
Carbon, the backbone of all life on Earth. Economies, homes, and transportation are powered by it. But humans are putting out more of it than ever before, and it's resulting in one of the most serious questions facing humanity today. What happens when we disrupt the carbon cycle? Carbon naturally falls down in rain, runs off in rivers and streams or into the ocean. Fossils both in the ocean and on land store it as well. Water evaporates back into the atmosphere, and the process starts over. Plants absorb it too, and put out pure oxygen to replace it. Left undisturbed, the carbon cycle keeps a consistent amount of carbon in the plant's ocean, land, and atmosphere. But the cycle is being disturbed.
We're kind of tinkering with the system in a way that's kind of questionable, to say the least.
Sean Sublett is a meteorologist and an expert on the carbon life cycle. He's concerned about how quickly we are pushing carbon into the atmosphere. Again,
before we started, burning the fossil fuels, I don't want to say everything is always in balance, but there wasn't something pushing the carbon in one direction. So there's obviously an excess of carbon, if you will, into the atmosphere right now.
Humans started burning fossil fuels for energy en masse during the Industrial Revolution. Since, our carbon emissions have risen steadily, now at about a 50% increase since the mid-1800s. It's not just fossil fuels. Remember the plant absorbing part of the cycle?
Plants take in carbon dioxide and they send back, oxygen into the atmosphere. Well, that's part of it. A lot of plants are taking in carbon.
When forests are cleared for human use, we remove large trees that would normally take carbon out of the atmosphere as they grow. Widespread deforestation hurts the balance. Less carbon taken in, more left in the atmosphere. But carbon takes time to impact the environment.
It's kind of like, well, I'm turning the thermostat on the oven. All right. If I turn the thermostat on the oven to 450, it's not 450 in 60 seconds. It takes a while to reach that level and then stabilize.
So far, we've seen a global temperature increase between 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Scientists say we're not even halfway to where we could go.
Probably going to go up at least another 2 or 3 degrees Fahrenheit at minimum here of these next 50, 60, 70 years.
Scientists believe warming up that much will impact sea levels for cities like New Orleans, Miami, Amsterdam, and more decades from now. But what we do in this decade can help prevent it.
There is some point of diminishing return, to be sure. And that's why you see a lot of how much is it going to warm in the next 60, 70, 80 years? Well, it depends on how much more CO2 we put into the atmosphere in these next 10, 20, 30 years or so.
Keeping you climate smart, Greg Perez, Fox 43 News.
While the most feared concerns lie ahead, we are already seeing some effects of warming climate here at home.
And coming up on part 3 of our Climate Smart series, our very own Andrea Michaels speaks to scientists about the impacts on the growing and allergy seasons, as well as the mosquito population. You can expect more on that tonight on Fox 43 News at 10.
Well, rising sea levels, melting ice caps are usually the images we associate with climate change, though there are more immediate effects. We're already seeing them here in South Central Pennsylvania. Fox 43's Andrea Michaels continues our Climate Smart series with a look at ways the warming climate is already bringing us longer mosquito and pollen seasons, and how the health concerns the two bring are only going to worsen as climate change shows no signs of stopping.
A warmer climate means longer summers and shorter winters. And while that means more time for the fun we associate with the warm season, it also means a longer window for the things we don't like. Let's start with the things that bite us. A familiar summer bug is already hanging around a little longer than usual, and that's expected to continue.
So we may find insects like mosquitoes biting us way into October when they normally wouldn't.
Higher temperatures over a longer period of time are allowing this little bugger to thrive.
Insects will grow much faster in warmer temperatures. and much slower in colder temperatures. Warmer temperatures allow them to be active longer during the day and allow them to live longer because they're not being killed back by the colder temperatures.
It's not just the extended warmth. Increased precipitation amounts in our warming climate affect these piercing pests too.
We get a lot of snow. When we get a lot of spring rains, that creates a lot of habitat for the mosquito larvae. And so we see this population of mosquitoes coming out a little bit earlier.
And if more mosquitoes are surviving the winter and into the spring, that larger population can impact West Nile season, particularly if a dry and hot summer follows a previously wet summer.
In the spring, if you get a lot of mosquitoes coming out and that viral load is jacked up in the birds, you get more and more mosquitoes picking up West Nile virus. And that's when West Nile can appear earlier in the season.
If you're okay with more bug spray and other mitigation measures during the warm season, you might not be okay with the extra pollen, at least if you have allergies. Dr. Hei Chong, Division Director of Allergy and Immunology for UPMC Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, has noticed her patients are reaching for treatments earlier than ever.
Sometimes I would say you can start your intranasal steroid March 1st, and then it got pushed back to February 15th. And now I'm even wondering if I need to start saying February 1st to cover for any warm seasons that we might have, where it's just unseasonably warm in February.
And this is no coincidence. Dr. Chong is familiar with several studies that link carbon dioxide increases to pollen increases from plants.
They flower more, they flower longer, and they create extra pollen.
She says there are studies that show the length of pollen season increased 20 days for each of the pollens. Nearby in Harrisburg, the total seasonal increase is 13 days since 1970. On top of that, pollen types such as trees, grasses, weeds, and ragweeds are lasting longer through the seasons and overlapping as well. Even molds, more of a winter-type pollen, can become more common in the milder and damper winters that become more common in a warmer climate.
The more humidity, the more it rains, the more damp it is, that can increase the mold that you're seeing. And that mold can actually also affect patients with asthma.
And there's more bad news, particularly for asthma patients.
The pollen itself can carry more of the harmful irritants in the atmosphere that we consider pollutants.
And unfortunately, this means asthma patients could be reaching for the inhaler more often as our climate continues to warm. If climate change continues unchecked, we'll have to keep adjusting and learn to live with the growing inconveniences and health concerns of more pollen and more mosquito bites. Andrea Michaels, Fox 43 News.
Now, of course, the best way to mitigate these issues is to substantially reduce carbon dioxide emissions on a global scale. There are small steps you can take every day to protect yourself from these blooming issues in our warmer climate. For some of those tips, head to our website, fox43.com. Well, one of the priorities of the Wolf administration is to reduce greenhouse gases and expand clean energy practices across the state. Fox 43's Danielle Miller takes a look at some of the goals that the Commonwealth has in place and how we can all work to reduce our footprint on the environment in the final portion of our Climate Smart series.
This is one of the most critical environmental problems that we have, right, facing the world. This is critical for us to address this issue.
Pennsylvania has a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 26% in 2025 and by 80% in 2050. These reductions were calculated using 2005 baseline levels. Dave Altoff, director of the Energy Programs Office at the Department of Environmental Protection, says that this will be a tough goal to meet.
Our analysis right now shows that, keeping on the track that we're on, we'll probably get to 24% reduction on that 2005 baseline by 2025, which is not meeting that 26% goal, but pretty close. But to make the 80% goal by 2050, we need to do a lot more.
But what does a lot more look like? The Department of Environmental Protection has a climate action plan in place, one that they update every 3 years. In this action plan, they identify the biggest contributors to greenhouse gases and what business owners and citizens can do. This includes switching to clean, renewable energy. One business taking the lead in this is Septa.
Septa, as you may imagine, is one of the largest energy consumers in the entire state of Pennsylvania. We run not only our buildings, but our trolleys, our regional rail, our subway elevated are all electrical propulsion powered.
The public transportation company has contracted Lightsource BP to construct 2 solar farms in Franklin County, one of which is already operational.
Once both farms are online, they're set to cover 20% of Septa's total electricity usage. That would erase over 19,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide from their greenhouse emissions every year. Now that figure is equal to the emissions of over 4,000 cars driven annually.
It's good for our bottom line, both our social bottom line, our environmental bottom line, and monetary, because solar is insulated somewhat from the swings in the electrical market. We know how much it's going to cost, and solar is not going to get more expensive.
This project also helps the local economy in Franklin County, as 100 jobs were created during the construction of the farms. According to Climate Central, this is part of a nationwide trend in which solar power is expanding dramatically. The independent group says that solar could add 52 jobs for every 10,000 people in PA through 2050. Installing solar panels is also a solution that you can invest in at home. But if that's not something you can financially commit to, DEP offers other ways for you to help reduce your emissions.
I think it starts with the standards: reduce, reuse, recycle. And then you want to look at your home energy systems, and you want to make sure that you're efficient.
While this may seem like an old phrase, it does have some practical applications. You can reduce your energy usage by carpooling or taking public transportation. If you need to purchase new appliances, make sure they're Energy Star certified. Other ways to reduce energy at home is to install sink aerators, lower your water heater temperature, and make sure you're unplugging appliances that are not in use. Electric vehicles also provide another way to reduce greenhouse gases.
I think that what we're going to see is when we start to see these electric pickup trucks, like, it's going to break the dam with regards to EVs on the road in Pennsylvania.
DEP offers rebates to people who invest in used or new alternative fuel vehicles. There are also ways that legislation could help reduce emissions. Pennsylvania planned to join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which would cap and reduce CO2 emissions by requiring power plants to acquire CO2 allowances. Plants are able to trade or buy allowances from each other. Pennsylvania is the only state in the Northeast that is not a part of the initiative, which is still in the General Assembly. While there's a lot to do in order to reduce emissions across PA, Althoff says that we are on the right path.
The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is making huge strides with regards to using renewable energy.
Danielle Miller, Fox 43 News.